All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on developing a relationship first versus rules first environment. We're so glad to have you join us. My name is Patrick North. I'm a learning engineer at Ukeru Systems. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you know how to best participate in today's event. We've taken a screenshot of an example of the attendee interface. You should see something that looks like this on your own computer desktop in the upper right-hand corner. You're listening in using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane, and then dial-in information will be displayed. We are eager for this to be as interactive as possible. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenter by typing them into the questions pane of the control panel. You can send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and address them during the Q&A session before we end today's presentation. In addition, we welcome you to join us throughout this conversation on social media by using the hashtag starts with you. A few other items we wanted to make you aware of. A copy of this presentation will be distributed in the next few days. We are also recording this conversation and we'll post that on our website later this week. The topic of creating trauma-responsive schools is one that is very important to us here at Ukeru. If you've attended one of our webinars in the past, you know that we believe that all intervention, educational and behavioral, should be built on an approach of comfort versus control. To help make this a reality, we provide training on the conceptual ideas such as trauma-informed care and conflict resolution, as well as the physical techniques that minimize the need for restraints and seclusion. We are not alone in this philosophy. More and more schools across the country are focusing on incorporating a trauma-informed approach into the learning environment. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by James Moffett, principal of Derby Hills Elementary School in Kansas, who has spent his career building and advocating for trauma-sensitive schools. Principal Moffett recognizes the importance of shifting from a rules-first to a relationships-first mindset when creating a trauma-responsive school in order to build a safe, connected environment for every student. During this webinar, we will hear about his experience in creating a trauma-informed environment at Derby Hills Elementary School, an environment that includes safe spots, mindfulness, self-regulation, and a social and emotional curriculum. Welcome, Principal Moffett. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to hear your story.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's definitely an honor to be with you guys. I've never been asked to do a webinar like this, so this is a new experience for me as well. But one thing I think is amazing in education, especially in our technological world right now, is the amount of collaboration that can happen. And I'm fortunate to be connected with some people and who are nowhere near me or all over the country, and they help me grow all the time. And I love getting ideas from them. So I look forward to this opportunity to share some ideas of some things that have been successful in our building here. That hopefully can be successful in other buildings as well, because really this is all about kids. We're in this for kids and making good decisions for kids. So I'm excited to join you guys. Thank you for having me. So we get into this, and we're really shifting. And you think about education in general over the last, I've been in education for 15 years now, and it's changed dramatically. We actually were able to interview some candidates yesterday for some open positions we have for next year. And one of the questions we asked is, how has teaching or the role of the teacher changed in the last 10 to 15 years? And as I sat back and listened to those 9 candidates talk, they all spoke about the differences in social emotional learning. And one thing that I've really been adamant about in the last 5 years as I started this journey was, when I was in school, and I'm 36 years old, and I remember, my schooling, and I had some incredible teachers. But one thing I really remember was every year when I stepped into that building, I was prepped and prepared to be successful, because what I found out was the expectations I had at home and the expectations my teachers had for me at school were the same. So there was never any question about what was expected from me. And as I think back now over my 15 years in education, I think one of the biggest disconnects that we have is that the expectations at home and the expectations at school are no longer the same. And so because those expectations are different, as educators who work with kids, we can no longer just be teachers of content. And, you know, just in that regard, our questions have changed. I thought about our interviews from yesterday, and we had 20 questions, and I think 18 of those questions had to do with relationships and building bonds with kids and connecting with kids, and maybe only one or two had to do anything with content. And so I think it goes back to, we know the expectations at home and school are different, and our first role as an educator at this point is not always content. Sometimes we have to be willing, and it's the most important thing, to spend time teaching those expectations. And we really want to shift from this RulesFirst campuses that we see all over the country to a RelationshipFirst campus, where relationships are at the base, the foundation of everything that we do. And so as we talk about this, we're going to I want to leave this kind of like a PD that if somebody was to go back to their building, they could take this webinar, they could take this presentation, they could lead this training with their staff. And we're going to share some things that have been successful, like I said, in our building. And there's going to be some opportunities for you guys to have some conversations in your building about, hey, things that you've seen, things that you thought about, things you thought about implementing. But overall, one of the biggest takeaways I hope you get out of this is that hopefully this shift isn't major for you guys. Because one thing I believe about every building, there's great things happening in every building. And sometimes, rather than start everything over brand new, we have to take a step back and realize that we're already doing some great things in our building. We need to give ourselves credit for the wonderful things we're already doing. Lots of times it's just simple changes or being more intentional about the things that we're doing and kind of checking the accountability of the systems we have in place to make sure that what we're doing with fidelity. And I know that's a bad word in education, but we have to give fidelity to the relationships in our building is what I really want people to think about. So we're going to go ahead and get started. We can go to that next slide. And as I look at this next slide, I think one of the biggest shifts as we've moved to being trauma-informed is really, this is a culture thing. This is a culture thing in the building, not just with the kids that we work with. This is a culture thing for the adults that we work with as well. And one of the biggest shifts that I've seen in our own building is the importance that we put on kindness and compassion and care. And we talk all the time about positive affirmations. And I have some people who give me some pushback sometimes. They say, you can't make people be nice. And I agree with that. You cannot make somebody be nice. But what you can do is set a foundation where people know that that's your expectation, and they know that it's okay to go out of your way to build relationships with your colleagues and your students. And along the way, just be kind. Be kind. It's pretty simple, and it always starts with us. So one of the things I would encourage people who are leading this training to do, we call this a snowball fight. And so really when we do this with our staff, and I've been able to do this with other staff as we're training, we literally take a piece of notebook paper and we have every single person write their name at the top of that piece of paper. And so when you write your name at the top of that piece of paper, the next thing I want you to do is just to crumple that paper up, and you're going to turn that piece of paper into a snowball. So just crumple it up really, 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 really good. And so as you're standing in the circle, so we can get our minds right and have that positive affirmations and that positive self-talk to start this training and start our days, the goal is we're going to have a snowball fight. So when you're leader, or when I say go, you basically throw all those snowballs into the middle of the circle, and then everybody goes and they pick one up. So you pick one up, you go back to your spot in the circle, and you open it back up. And as you open it, hopefully you have somebody else's paper at this point. And when you're looking at that other person's paper, your goal is to write something you admire about that person, something positive about that person, something you respect about that person, or just a compliment about them. And so we take a few minutes and everybody writes a compliment about that person on the page and they sign their name to it. And then after they're done, they crumble it back up. And after everybody's written their positive affirmation about that person, we get back in our circle and we throw it back in. And we go through this about 4 or 5 times. And on that 5th time, you get it again and you write down one more positive affirmation about whoever's paper you got. And obviously, if you get the same paper again, if you get yours, just switch with somebody next to you. But you get somebody else that last time, you open it up, you write your last positive affirmation, and then you're going to go present that back to somebody. And really what that does, and I've been amazed to see how many adults feel uncomfortable with that. And I think in the end, it's kind of sad that we feel uncomfortable reading positive things about ourselves. I think that's just a lack of positivity in our culture by nature. But really, even if you feel uncomfortable, even if you're shy, it's such a wonderful thing to read the positive affirmation that somebody has to say about you, or the people that you work with have to say about you. And especially in a building like our size, we have almost 80 staff members. We don't get to see them every single day. We probably don't get to build the relationship that we wish we could. I know for me as a building leader, I don't get to spend as much time with each individual as I wish I could. So this was something that was grounding and good for me. And I always encourage people, take that snowball, the one that you get, open it back up, and find some place in your classroom, find some space in your office or your space where you can just refer to it when you can, just to remember the positive things that are going on in your building. Because one thing I shared with our staff recently, we just got through February. We have spring break next week. And I tell people all the time, February and the beginning of March before spring break are the worst times of a school year, because we all fall into this rut where we're overwhelmed. We have a lot going on. We're getting forward to spring break. We're looking into state assessments, and it can just be overwhelming. So it's important that we do these positive team building things to help create and maintain that positive culture in our school buildings. I would encourage people just to go through that activity. It's quick, it's simple, not a lot of materials are needed, but it has very, very lasting effects. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So as we look at this, one of the other activities, and this one's, shifting from being pessimist to being optimist. And the explanation for this activity is here, but I encourage you to do this one as well. So as people partner up, you have one person that's going to be the optimist in the group, one person that's going to be the pessimist in the group. And so the goal of this activity is, I want, as you guys take turns, I want the first person, the optimist, is going to go first. And the optimist, all they're going to do is describe in great detail the route that they're going to take after this training's over, at the end of the school day, the route that they're going to take to go from work to home. And again, I want them to be very explicit about where they're going to turn, why they're going the way they're going. And then here's the hard part. The pessimist in that group, and each person's going to get a turn to play each role. The pessimist in that group, your goal is to second guess and question everything that person says, every direction they give, every reasoning they give. I want you to second guess it and question. And so as we go through this, it usually takes about 5 to 8 minutes for each person to play that role. But at the end, we get to have some discussion. And you say, as an optimist, how did you feel when the pessimist was second guessing and questioning everything that you said? And ultimately, the conversation we have is, it didn't feel good. It didn't feel good. And then so I followed it up, and the question is, so when you're with the pessimist all the time, who's second guessing or questioning or just showing this negativity all the time, what begins to happen? And the conversation leads to, we begin to avoid them. And I say, well, what does that do to a staff, a culture of a building? And we talk about how division can begin to occur, because we get into these cliques where we have optimists over here and pessimists over here. And that's a really basic example. But the next question is important, because I want them to forget about the route that they take to get home. Now I want them to think about, what if we were talking about a student? What if we were talking about one of those hard to reach, hard to connect with, those students who sometimes struggle when they walk in the door? What if we were talking about a student? If I'm the optimist whose thinking is all kids can learn, behavior is a form of communication, and I need to dig down deep and figure out what's going on with this kid, what begins to happen when I'm faced with a pessimist who doesn't believe all kids can learn, who believes that there's just bad kids out there, and believes that, I had that sibling, or I know that parent, it's just a bad family, it's a bad seed? What begins to happen with the culture of the building? And really, ultimately, we need to get to a point where we're all optimists for kids. We're all in for kids every single day. So again, this is just kind of another team building activity to start this training. We're really beginning to identify and really hopefully have some self-reflection about who we are as teammates in this school and the way that we affect the culture of a building. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So there's some questions I want you to think about, and this is Ross Green, and he does some great work around this, but there's kind of two questions, and I kind of want people to have some discussion about, what do they believe? Do they believe that kids do well if they can, or do they believe that kids do well if they want to? And this is really an interesting question, and ultimately we want to get to the belief that kids do well if they can, because that drives everything we do. So go back to the beginning where we said the expectations have changed. So home expectations, school expectations are different. So it's our job to teach the expectation. And we have to start with the belief that if I'm willing to spend the time to teach the expectation, I believe because of the relationship, and that's what this whole thing's about, because of the relationship that I build with kids, and because every kid that steps in our building knows that I would never ask them to do something that would harm them or hurt them. They know that I always have their best interests at heart. I'm an optimist for all kids, because all kids can learn, all kids can grow, all kids can do the things that we set out for them to do if they have the tools to do it. Just like with adults. Adults can do the things we ask them to do if they have the tools to be successful. So this question really resonates with me, because it's about, are we preparing our kids, giving them the tools that they need, having the belief in them and the encouragement in them to know that they can do well if we give them the tools to do well. We have to get out of this mindset that kids really don't want to do well, because kids do want to do well. That's their nature to do well. It's their nature to connect with caring adults in their life. And then those caring adults ultimately are the motivating factor for them to want to do well. And also those motivating adults care about them enough to give them the tools so they can do well. So you can spend a lot of time on this specific slide and really have some good discussion and really get some people thinking about what's happening in our building, and are we giving the kids the tools that they need to be successful. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. As I look at this, I want you to think about your school. And I did this training about a month ago in a school close by. And I want us to think about what are the things, and I would encourage you to kind of make a list here. Maybe you can work in small groups and then bring your list together. But at your core, what do you believe about kids? Not just behaviorally, but academically as well. You as a building, what do you believe about kids? And then how does your school put those beliefs in action? You know, one of the things I joke about, there's a song out there from a few months ago, Walk It Like You Talk It. Yeah. So we can, as educators, we have lots of cliches that we say. Lots of cliches that we say, but do we truly believe the things that we're saying? Because lots of times what I found is my words say one thing, but my actions don't line up. So this is about us really reflecting as a group, not just as individuals, but as a group. What do we believe about kids? What do we believe that kids can do academically and behaviorally? And what things do we have as evidence? So think about when we talk about Common Core, we talk about kids showing evidence of their learning. What evidence do we have in our building that puts into belief or puts into action the things that we say we believe about kids? And again, this is something that might take you some time. And it's going to have some discussion that goes back and forth. And so, you know, we talk about having norms. And one of the norms that we talk about all the time is that my opinion is going to be listened to. My opinion is going to be valued. I may not always agree, but it's important that the opinion of each person in this group is heard and valued. So again, have some discussion about this. Let's go ahead and look at the next slide. Do relationships really matter? So I talked about those interviews we had yesterday. One of the other questions we asked, we said, you know, why Derby Hills? In the state of Kansas, we have darn near 1,000 jobs in the state that are open right now. And we'll have the same number next year. So one of the questions I ask is, what makes you as a candidate, whether you're a veteran teacher who's trying to come to our building or a brand new teacher fresh out of college who wants to come to our building, what makes Derby Hills appealing? And I can tell you, in our team of people, we have 8 people on our interview team. And one of the things that we were very proud of, that we heard people say, we had one person, my favorite response was, when I walk in this building, when I research, when I look at social media, I know that this school puts relationships before content. In this school, we're a relationship-first campus. And so people know that. And that kind of goes back to that branding and who you are as a school and branding your school. Because part of branding your school is not just for the kids, it's not just for the parents, it's to make sure that you can attract the right type of person to work in your building. So do relationships really matter in your building, and how is that shown? How is that shown? One of my Hamish Brewer, I'm principal of the year, great guy, skateboarding principal. I've had some conversations with him, and I can tell you one thing that he said that it will forever stand out with me. He says, in our building, relationships with kids always come first. And he said, to the point that if I'm in the hallway having a conversation with an adult in our building, and a student approaches me, and I can see that they're waiting to have a conversation with me, he said, I will always stop the conversation with the adult to have the conversation with the student, because we're here for kids. Kids come first at all times. And because kids come first, I'm willing to put this conversation with the adult on pause. And here's the thing, if I have the right people in my building, the adult that I'm talking to is going to understand that. They're going to know that I'm putting these kids first, so I can have a conversation with the student and then continue my conversation with the adult. On my door, I have a quote on my door, and I know it upsets some people, but again, it's about the right mindset and remembering to keep relationships first. And the quote on my door, I heard this from somebody else who shared it with me from a conference, and it says, you know, kids always come first, teachers are a close second, but teachers are a clear second. That resonated with me so much that I asked my secretary, hey, I want this quote on my door right away. So on my door, every time I walk in, it puts it back to the forefront of my mind, kids are always first. I love my teachers. I'll do everything I can to support my teachers, but kids always comes first. And so that's a relationship thing with the students in my building as well. But again, it's about attracting and branding your school to attract the right people in your building who understand that. So they're not taking offense to you putting kids first. They understand and they share in that vision of putting kids first. Go to the next slide. I want us to think about this, and I'm not into reading slides, but this one's important enough that I will. Because this is in my 5 years, this is something that I found, because I think another one of our cliches is that relationships have to come first, but we don't always put that into action in our schools. And I think from a teacher standpoint, some of the reason they don't put this into action in their schools is because their building leaders aren't letting them know it's okay. Because as an administrator, I have to tell my teachers, I have to give them permission to put relationships first. Because if you think about everything that we see in the news, everything that I look on social media, when it comes to schools, for the most part, we spend time talking about academics. I know for us in our local area, right outside Wichita, Kansas, so the Wichita Eagle, what do they post? At the end of every school year, they post academic data. They're not posting anything about relationships. They're posting academic data. And because all they post is academic data, as schools, as educators, we tend to focus on the academics more than we do the relationship. Well, what I found is we're going to take a step back, and I can't remember if I talk about this in this presentation later, but I'll mention it now. What I found in these 5 years is the way to improve my academic data is not through more homework, more rigorous instruction. The way that we improve our academic data is through improving our relationships with the caring adults and the students in our building. That starts with the building leader giving their teacher permission to spend time on relationships first and content second. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next one. Truly, and you notice I crossed out trauma responsive because after I wrote this one, I thought about this isn't just a trauma responsive thing. This is effective schools. Truly effective schools are more focused on relationships than academics. That's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward, but it's so powerful and impactful. Next slide, please. And here I did put this in there. I already read this for you. You can look over it again. But I do think this is the point. And every once in a while, I will take something that I see or something that we share, and I'll type it up. I'll put it in teachers' boxes, and I want to bring this back to their forefront of their mind as well. We're all about rigor and relevance. We'll talk about that here in a little bit because those are our goals as a district and our goals as a building. We pick rigor and relevance as our district-wide goals. And then here in our school, we pick goals underneath each of those things. But again, if I want to continue to improve the data in my building, I need to improve the relationships in our building as well. Next slide. All right, so this one, we had a video in here, and just with the webinar online, we couldn't get to this, but one of the videos I would hope and encourage you guys to watch, most of us have watched Rita Pearson's TED Talk. It is still by far the most powerful TED Talk. I watch it at the beginning of every school year and multiple times throughout the school year, but she talks about the power of relationships, and she says so many funny but just pertinent things. She talks about kids don't learn from people they don't like. That's powerful. Because even think about in our building, the people we connect with in our building, the colleagues that we work well with, I work well with people that I like. I'm a professional. I can work well with people that I don't necessarily, I'm not best friends with, but I know I have the best working relationships with the people that I can also call friend and the people that I can reflect with and grow with professionally. And Rita says so many things. And one of the things that we took away as a building, we do in our morning announcements. Our morning announcements are broken into 4 sections, and it comes from conscious discipline, really. And I will say our morning announcements take 8 or 9 minutes every single day, but it's really the foundation of our day and getting our day started on the right track. So we talk a lot about the importance of connecting to one another and committing to something, and we de-stress. And so under our commitment, we actually have a positive self-talk, a positive affirmation that we say every single day. And it came straight from Rita Pearson. We say every student in our building, almost all 600 of them, every single day, we say, I am somebody. I was somebody when I came. I'll be a better somebody when I leave. I am powerful and I am strong. I deserve the education I get when I'm here. So she continues that positive affirmation in her TED Talk. And so that's something I think we need to continuously come back to and have some takeaways from, because it's powerful, it's strong, and it really focuses on the intentionality that has to be placed on relationships with caring adults in our building. Next slide. So here we go. So as we get into this, I kind of want you to look at this picture, because in my mind, and I've worked in 4 different districts and 4 different schools now, and I'm fortunate now to get to travel all over the country to talk with schools and talk with districts. But in my opinion, this is what happens in most schools. Most schools are very rules-first campuses. And here's what that means. Rules are the center of everything they do. Structure is the center of everything they do. And I'm not saying rules and structures are bad things, because they're not. But if that's all we ever focus on, I want you to think about what's going to happen in our building, because this is an epidemic for us in the U.S. especially, because we focus so much on rules, and then we have some type of crisis that happens. We have some type of event that happens, and we're very reactive. Education in America is very reactive. We're going along, something bad happens, we react to it. Why not be proactive? So in these rules-first campuses, we focus on rules, we focus on structure, something bad happens, we try to fit in. And if you look at the cogs around, we try to fit in social emotional learning when we can. I was doing academics. We had this event happen in our neighborhood. We're going to take 5 minutes out of our academic time today because we want to focus and react to what happened in our community. The problem with that is, and I, as an educator, 10 years in the classroom, I can tell you right away, if it's not in my schedule, it usually doesn't happen. Let's be honest. If it's not built into my schedule intentionally, I say that word all the time, if it's not built into my schedule intentionally, it's probably not going to happen. And so this model hasn't been successful for us. Being rules first hasn't been successful for our kids either. So if I go to this next slide, we can talk about what happens in this. And here's the fact that I hope that we understand, because I told you rules and structure are not a bad thing. But I believe this to be true. Rules and structure without relationship can trigger the very behaviors we're hoping to eliminate. Let's think about that as adults. And I believe in empathy, so I always want the adults to put themselves in the shoes of their students. If I'm the adult who's working for a boss, whether it be in a school or another setting, that I don't have a relationship with, and that boss is always on me about do this, do this, do this, do it this way, do it that way, what begins to happen is there's a disconnect in our relationship that's already non-existent. And lots of times I turn to be spiteful. It causes triggers within me that make that culture of that building not as successful as it should be. So I really want you to think about this. Rules without relationship are not going to be successful. Structure without relationship is not going to be successful. Rules and structure are good things. We need to have boundaries for kids. We need to hold kids accountable, but we need to do it with the relationship intact. Because with that relationship intact, rules and structure can cause us to be successful. But without the relationship, rules and structure can trigger behaviors that we're working so hard to eliminate already. Next slide. Let's talk about what can happen in our RelationshipFirst campus. Because in this relationship-focused campus, it says effective schools are relationship first. What does this mean? Notice how this has changed. Relationships are the focus of everything we do. The primary focus of everything we do is relationship. And then around that, I can fit in content. Because here's the deal. We know if I look at ELA, I know what my standards are. I can read any book I wanted to and talk about main idea and compare and contrast and all those skills that we know we have to talk about. Why not spend some time focusing on relationships within that content? Relationships matter. Relationships first. And so around the relationships, which includes that social emotional learning, around the relationship, I can embed content. This is a better model for kids. This is proven for us in our building to be more successful for kids. Because this year for us at Derby Hills, we say this is the year of relationships. Relationships are always the most important thing, but we were even more intentional this year. And we'll talk about that here in a second, some of the things that we've done to foster those relationships. But when we've been focusing on relationships first, we're not saying our academics have not suffered. We've gotten so collaborative, we're working so well with our teammates that our academics are improving, but we focus on relationships to get there. And I talked earlier about the rigor and relevance and how those are our goals. We look at this next slide. I can tell you it's rigor, relevance, and relationships because I believe this to be true. We talk about this all the time. Relationships make rigor possible and relevance easy. Think about that. Relationships make rigor possible and relevance easy. Because it's the relationships that allow me to work with students who feel motivated enough to step outside the box, take risks, and try, to make an effort. And so it's the relationships that allow me to know what my students' interests are so I can make the learning relevant for them. So again, relationships make rigor possible and relevance easy. All right, next slide. So as we go through this is just my thinking. I'm not an expert on this by any means. I don't think I'm an expert. But in my experience, I found this to be true. There's 3 phases of every relationship. 3 phases. So the first thing, there has to be a reach. There has to be a connection. There has to be the beginning of a relationship. So it goes from reaching to repairing and to responding. And this is so true with kids especially because if we're being honest, think about kids or think about adults for that matter. I can have a relationship that I've established, but as a human being, at some point, I'm probably going to cause some disconnect in that relationship. And for me to establish and maintain a positive relationship, I have to know how to repair a relationship, and I have to know how to respond when something doesn't go my way. So these what I think are the 3 phases of relationship: reach, repair, and respond. Again, reach, repair, respond. We're going to spend some time with some guiding questions, and I'm going to share some examples of what we do in each of these things to help. So if we think about the reach, I want you to think about your building in particular. What do you do to establish relationships? And here's the thing. Relationships are not just student to adult or student to teacher. There's so many different types of relationship within a building that all have to be effective for that building to be successful. So we're talking about relationships student to student, teacher to student, school to home, and school to community. So if you're doing this training with your staff, I want you guys to do some self-reflection. I want you to think about, what do we do in these areas? In each of these areas of relationship, what are we already doing? Because again, this isn't about me throwing out everything I'm already doing. This is about us taking a tally, taking an account of what we're already doing, and then being more intentional, and maybe adding a few things to help us reach our goal. So as I look at the next slide, which kind of shows some things that have happened in our building that we've seen to be successful. So this is the ways that we reach out to build relationships with all those different stakeholders in our building. These are actually just copies of tweets that I put out in the last year or so. And I'm going to go through each of these 6 pictures. I'll tell you about what type of relationship it is and how that's been successful for us. And that top left, don't expect you to be able to read it, but this is us working to build a relationship with our community. So this is school to community. This is that civic engagement piece. We talk about this a lot, especially here in the state of Kansas. So one thing we've done, we do this thing called Jeans for a Cause. And in this particular tweet, we had a sheriff's deputy who was killed in the line of duty. And so that was obviously a horrific event. And that was obviously something that was pretty prominent in our community. And there's lots of people reaching out, figuring out how they can help. So what we've done in the last couple of years, actually 3 years or so now, we do this thing called Jeans for a Cause. So our dress code, typically in the course of a week, teachers get to wear jeans on Wednesday. It's our school spirit day. So if you're wearing Derby Hills gear, you wear jeans. On Friday, it's another spirit day, but it's our district spirit day because we have one high school that we all feed into. And so kind of that district pride thing, we're the Derby Panthers is our high school. So you can wear green, you get to wear Derby Panther gear, and you get to wear jeans on that day as well. The other 3 days, we dress more professionally. So one thing we've done is we do this thing called Jeans for a Cause. So we identify causes in our community that we want to donate to, that we want to help. And so on this particular one, we did Jeans for a Cause for the family of that sheriff's deputy who was killed in the line of duty. And so teachers were able to donate. I think on this one we did $10. And if you donated $10 to this cause that we could present a check to this family, teachers were allowed to wear jeans for the entire week that we did that. One of the ones we just did recently here within the last year or so, we had some students, several diabetic students. So we chose to do a Jeans for a Cause event for our American Diabetes Association, the Wichita chapter, but mainly focusing on children. So on that one, teachers were able to donate $20, and they got to wear jeans for the entire month. And in each of these, if we go back to the sheriff deputy one, we donated nearly $1,000 to his family. And then the same thing on the Jeans for a Cause for the American Diabetes Association. We were able to give them almost $2,000 from our school. And really, that was just us connecting, taking an active role in what was going on in our community and responding to help. Now, obviously, financially, is not the only way that we can respond. That's just how we chose to do it that time. So Jeans for a Cause has been very successful for us. Next picture on the top row, that middle row, this is another one of those community partnerships. We were able to do this thing called Wellness Wednesday. So we talk a lot about the brain and physical activity. And so we were doing a Jeans for a Cause, and people were able to, we have Genesis Fit Health Clubs, which is in our community. And they actually send personal trainers out one Wednesday a month, and they spend the entire day with us. And I will preface this by saying we are really, really lucky to have community partners who I found in the last 5 years, there's community people willing to help. They're just waiting on somebody to ask. So we reached out to Genesis Health Clubs. They said yes. They come in one Wednesday a month for Wellness Wednesday. And on Wellness Wednesday, each grade level has a 30-minute block of time, separate from PE, separate from the recess, where we're just physically active. Teachers are encouraged to participate as well, because as we talk about the brain, which is one of the things we do a lot, that physical activity is connected to more brain activity. So we want to make sure that we have kids that are physically active. And so Genesis Health Club comes in every month. We don't pay them a penny to do it. We advertise for them. put them on social media. We share about the awesome things that they're doing for us, and that's been an amazing partnership for us. The next one, top row, this is that, principal or student to adult, any of those things that we talk about all the time, but it's really about just getting them to do positive phone calls, the importance of a positive phone call. So we do these things called good news calls of the day. The good news call of the day is a teacher can write a positive office referral for a student who's done something positive in class. I get the opportunity to call home on that student and say, hey, your student's done an awesome job. They've worked really hard this week. One of my favorite reasons to call is what we call a bounce back day. So a student might have had a rough day the day before. They have a good day today. We're going to make a phone call home. We believe that where we focus on is what we're going to get. So we focus on positivity, we'll get positivity. And so on this one, anybody who gets a phone call, we do our best to take their pictures. We post it on social media. They get this wristband for me that talks about they get a good news call of the day. That's something that we do for kids. Bottom row really quick. Bottom left, this is important, teacher-to-teacher relationships. So we do these things every Tuesday after school. It's optional. Sometimes we have lots of people. Sometimes we don't have anybody. Sometimes we just have just a few. These are staff walkabouts. So you can show up at 3:30, which is after our contract day. You just find somebody new to walk with, somebody you didn't walk with before, somebody you may not get to have lots of conversation with. You just walk with them and you build a relationship with them. You can work collaboratively through an issue that you have in your classroom. You can just get to know somebody you don't really get to know. But it's really about building those bonds among staff members, because I do believe the culture amongst the staff is what extends to the students. Middle row, we talk about student-to-student interactions. So we actually switched our lunch schedule up this year. It's been successful for us. And so kindergarten and third grade go to lunch at the same time. First and fourth grade go to lunch at the same time. Second and fifth grade go to lunch at the exact same time. And so not only are they at lunch at the same time, they're mixed as they're sitting so they can have some conversations. One joke I always make is, I don't know who the disturbed person was who decided to give ketchup packets to kindergartners who can't open them. But when you have kindergartners and third graders together, they're able to ask for help from their third grade friends who open it up for them. And then on the way outside for recess, they do a good job helping those younger kids follow those hallway expectations, especially at the beginning of the year. But this particular picture is one that was really cool for me, because this is one of our paraprofessionals who was outside at recess duty. She sent this picture for me. This is actually a group of fourth grade boys who, they weren't asked to do this. This is purely organic. They chose to teach our first grade boys how to play kickball. And so you can see those bonds that are happening with students that they normally wouldn't get to talk with. These are first graders and fourth graders playing and learning together. Last picture on here, we do something called Dragon Clubs. So Dragon Clubs happen twice a week. So this is one of those times we're taking academic time away because we're saying relationships first. So we're giving up 1 hour of our academic time a month, and we're focusing on relationships. And here's how Dragon Clubs work. Every certified teacher in our building who is here on Fridays runs a club. They get to pick something that they're passionate about. I don't tell them what their club has to be. I say, will you pick something you're passionate about that you want to share with your kids? So they write up a club description, and then our students get to pick which clubs they want to join. They get to pick 3 choices, and then we work together to get them assigned to the club that they want to be in. And so we have everything. This is like a Star Wars club you see a picture of. We have Gaga Ball Club. We have Rock Climbing Club. We've had Volleyball Club. We've had Walking and Running Clubs. We have Starbucks Club. We have Reading Club. There's all these different types of clubs. But more importantly, we get to connect kids to kids, because they're working with kids that they don't normally get to work with, because every club is mixed, kindergarten through 5th grade. There's no clubs just for 5th grade or just for 4th grade. Every club is open to kindergarten through 5th grade who may want to sign up for that club. So they're working student to student, but they're also working with a different adult that they normally wouldn't get to work with, because it may not be their classroom teacher. It's just a different adult in the building. So as you can see, we're working on relationships in lots of different ways: school to community, student to student, teacher to teacher, and then also, of course, school to home, and then teacher to student. Let's go look at the next slide. So as I look at this next slide, real quick, there's some house things. We work to have like a house system like Ron Clark and several other schools have done. Again, and our houses were a little bit different. So in each house, there's 4 houses. We're the dragon. So we actually took our houses from How to Train Your Dragon. Those are the names of our houses. So in each house, there's a kindergarten, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade house. They have house meetings once a month. So this one's one of my favorite house meetings I've seen all year. I want to say this is our Stormcutter house. I'm sorry if I'm wrong on that one, but they actually, for one of their house meetings, they went outside and they tagged the playground. So you have students working together across grade levels, and they were tagging the playground with sidewalk chalk saying, hey, Stormcutter is the best house. Be kind, just lots of positivity on our playground, which I thought was pretty cool. And we originally picked our houses. You can kind of see the Harry Potter hat That's how we picked with the sorting hat what we were going to do. Let's go to the next slide, please. Brain groups, I'll go through that really quickly. We focus on the brain every Wednesday morning. We have mixed group for our social emotional block. So all of our kids are completely randomized. We have lessons every week about the brain, different parts of the brain, what happens in different parts of the brain. We also throw in some character ed in there, growth mindset, power of yet. It's been fun to see kids, again, connecting with different kids they don't normally get to connect with, and also connecting with different adults. Because as a classroom teacher, you're going to have 23 to 25 kids, kindergarten through 5th grade, that depend on you every Wednesday morning. They come to you to get their lesson about the brain that we send out for teachers to go through. Next slide. Positive phone calls. We challenge teachers to make positive phone calls on their students. This is from last month, and we wanted just to share the positive, or from last year during March, I'm sorry. We wanted teachers just to make positive phone calls on all their kids. Next one. We'll go through these pretty quickly so we can get to that next slide. We do community service projects, or grade levels are working. This is connecting with the community. Some of my favorite ones, like 2nd grade this year, they actually brought in donations of tennis balls and old t-shirts, and they created dog toys to go to the Kansas Humane Society, and they went to the Kansas Humane Society, delivered them, and learned about how they operate, why they operate, which was kind of cool. Our 3rd grade does like Salvation Army bell ringing at Dillon's at night. So lots of cool things that teachers are working with their kids on to connect with the community. Next slide. We're going to go ahead and skip through this. You guys can see the kind of an observation challenge. And now I want to go to that next one. So we said there was reach. Now this is the respond. And here's one of those guiding questions for you to work on with your staff. So how does your school respond to behaviors in a way that maintains all the stakeholder relationships you've worked to establish? Really think about, how do you respond to behaviors? And you go ahead and go to the next slide as we talk about this. But one of the things I want us to think about is the difference between responding and reacting. And responding is very different than reacting. So responding means I'm taking the time to think through how I want to work with this student to solve a problem. Reacting is very punitive. Reacting means I don't take the time to think. And so as you think about what our kids deserve, our students deserve to be responded to. They deserve to be responded to. And on this one, I want you to think about, in my 5 years as an administrator, I spent 10 years in the classroom, now my 5th year as an administrator. It doesn't happen very often where a student gets sent to the office for that first behavior. We talk a lot about major and minor behaviors. Major behaviors come to the office right away. And in my experience, we don't have lots of major behaviors. Here's what we have. We have minor behaviors that upset a teacher. And sometimes, because we're human, that teacher reacts to the behavior. And as part of that reaction causes that student to be escalated even more. So I think of it as there's an initial escalation that if we were to respond to it, we could solve the situation quickly and the student could continue with their day. But when we react to that original escalation, which means we yell, we get upset, we're sarcastic, we have a poor attitude with the student, that student gets their cue from us. So I believe that calm brings calm, escalation brings escalation. So when I'm escalated, the student gets escalated. And what turned out to be at the beginning a small or a minor behavior, but if I responded to it, I could have solved it and moved on, becomes a major behavior that ends up in the office. And so what I feel like is if we as the adults can work on our response to behaviors rather than reacting to behaviors, we can alleviate a lot of the major stuff that comes to the office. Next slide. I talked about this, responding is always greater than reacting. Keep that in mind. On this one, we can go ahead and go through that, just a quote, but I want you to spend some time thinking about it at a later time. So go ahead and go to the next slide. The staff's behavior. This is the responses. So I'm not going to read through all of those. One of the things we say, you can see it on the heart on the right side, this is our school motto, and it really kind of resonates with us, and it really kind of lines up with our philosophy of what our school should do. But one thing we say to students every single day, I hear teachers saying it to kids all the time. I say it to students at the end of the announcements every single day. It says, we love you. There's nothing you can do about it. In fact, it's kind of funny. One of our kindergarten teachers brought me a picture today that one of her students had made for her. And it was a picture of him, and he had taken the time to write this to the best of his ability. He said, I love you, and there's nothing you can do about it. So as you begin to respond to behaviors and keep this at the center of who you are and the way you work with kids, your kids pick up on it, and they begin to reciprocate those feelings for you. But this right here talks about the 5 steps of the way that we can respond to the behaviors that we see, not react, but respond. Next slide. This effective communication is a form of effective communication involves listening to understand. So I want us to keep in mind that part of that response is listening. Do I know all the information? before I respond to a situation. Next slide. So this one, and I work with Jim's 4-leader, and I know he got this from somebody else, and that's the beauty of collaboration. So in a traditional school, and I would say in that RulesFirst Campus, we follow model number 1. I notice something I don't like, I react to it, which means I punish, I yell, I scream, I escalate, and what generally happens? The student becomes escalated as well. So when I move away from that model, we're trying to get to model number 2. And in model number 2, there's 4 steps. I want to notice, name, validate, and respond. And we found that that helps the adult stay calm so the student is calm. So again, notice, name, validate, respond. You got to spend some time working on this one. But the notice phase, I'm going to notice, I'm going to call out a behavior that I see. So for me, we spent a lot of time at the beginning of this identifying our triggers. And a trigger for me was when a kid would roll their eyes. That was something that would cause me normally to be escalated. So if I were to work with a student that rolled my eyes, the notice phase, I would call them out for what I see. I would say, hey, I noticed you rolled your eyes at me. That's that notice phase. Next is naming. And I'm going to name the emotion that I think that student is feeling. And if I'm not sure, I'm going to ask the student how they're feeling. But it goes from noticing me saying, hey, I noticed you rolled your eyes at me, to naming it. You must be annoyed. You must be bothered. You must be feeling some type of way about me to roll your eyes at me. The next phase, I think, is huge. It's the validation part. And here, I want to be clear. We're not validating the behavior because the behavior was inappropriate. I'm validating the emotion. I'm validating how they felt. Because how they feel is okay. What gets kids into trouble is when they don't respond to that feeling appropriately. So as I go through this phase, I might say, hey, I noticed you rolled your eyes at me. You must be annoyed or bothered by me. I'm going to validate that. I'm going to say, I get it. I get annoyed sometimes too. I get bothered sometimes too. In fact, I remember being in 7th grade with my 7th grade math teacher, and he frustrated me when I rolled my eyes. And I said, if I want to be really transparent with that student, I might say, I work with teachers sometimes who frustrate me, and I roll my eyes at them, if I'm being really honest. But that validating, again, I'm validating the emotion, not the behavior. And then the respond. In that respond phase, because I've made myself transparent to them, I've opened myself up to them, I want to have a conversation with them about, I can't stop you from being annoyed or bothered ever again, because in life, things are going to happen. They're going to annoy you or bother you. But I want to work with you to help you learn how to better respond the next time you feel that way. Because when you roll your eyes, you come across as disrespectful or rude. You're not disrespectful or rude. So let's work together to come up with a way to respond the next time you're annoyed. And that process takes a little bit longer. But what we found is when we take the time to notice, name, validate, respond, I, as the adult, am calm, so I can help my students remain calm, which is the ultimate goal. We want to avoid the escalation, help students be calm, help them regulate so we can carry on with our day. So again, spend some time on that. Notice, name, validate, respond. Notice means I'm calling out the behavior. Naming, I'm naming the emotion. Validating, I'm connecting with them about how they're feeling. Responding, I'm working with them to help them come up with a better way to respond the next time they feel triggered. Next slide. This is actually an example of we have our badges that we wear, and so we kind of took some of the things that we talk about even in this presentation, but we talk about all the time. And I gave teachers this to have as a badge reminder, just something to have. Just, I'm having a rough day. I just need to look at one of these quotes or one of these things to help me get through the day. So I would encourage you, if you email me, I'd be happy to share the Google Doc with you that you can go, adjust it to fit your needs. But this has been helpful for me and for staff as well. Next slide. And the last one, repair. And this is hard because as we work with students, we work with adults, there's going to be times that we kind of disconnect in relationship. How do we repair relationship? This is a life skill that our kids need to have. So how do you work to repair relationships after a disconnect or inappropriate behavior to sustain relationships and make the consequence meaningful and accepted? And that word consequence, I want us to make sure we're clear on the difference between a consequence and a punishment. A punishment is punitive. A punishment is harsh. A punishment is something I do to somebody else to make me feel better. A consequence, on the other hand, can be positive or negative, but a consequence is intended to teach. To teach, hey, that behavior was inappropriate. Let's work and figure out a way to not fall into that trap again, or I'm going to give you a consequence that's going to help you learn why that was wrong and how we can repair. So let's look at the next slide as we think about that guiding question. So on this next slide, this is from Dr. Ross Green. He talks about a collaborative problem-solving method, and this is important that we understand. As I look at this, most schools are very unilateral. And it's one of those things, when I say it out loud, you're going to kind of begin to think, well, that's really backwards. Why do we do that in education? But in most schools, I have a disruption in the classroom across the building. And that teacher and that student or two students have a disconnect. And rather than dealing with it there, we send that student out to go to the office of somebody who was not in the room, didn't see anything that happened, and we expect that person to fix it. And not only do we expect that person to fix it, we expect that person, usually the principal, to say, this is what you're going to do to fix the problem. Well, here's the problem. I wasn't there. I don't know what happened. I don't know the background information. So what Ross Greene talks about, he talks the importance of collaborative problem solving, where the people involved in the situation are the people involved in solving the situation or working to a resolution. So that's just a change in the repairing of that relationship, because as educators, one of the things that we get frustrated about all the time is, I didn't have any input into that decision. Well, our students feel the same way. We want to make sure they have input into the decision. Next slide. All right, so our consequences and punishments the same. I've kind of already told you that, but it'd be interesting as you work with your staff to kind of hear their thinking on this. We think that they're drastically different. We think that students deserve consequences, not punishments, because punishment causes disconnect in relationship. Think about how you feel when somebody treats you harshly or somebody just dismisses you. That causes a disconnect in relationship. But when I have a caring relationship with somebody, they understand that part of my job is to help them grow and to hold them accountable. So I might offer consequences that help them with that lagging skill. So we have to look at behavior, or inappropriate behavior especially, as a lagging skill where students need support. They need the tools like we talked about at the beginning. They'll do well if they can. So we need to make sure that we ensure that they have the tools to be successful. That last question, talk about empathy. Which one would you like from your supervisor? I definitely want consequences from my supervisor. I don't want punishments that are harsh, that cause disconnect, but I do have to be accepting of criticism and feedback that's intended to help me grow. Next slide. Real quick, and I think this kind of summarizes everything we've talked about today as we kind of wrap up here. I want us to think about what it means to be a successful adult. And I've done this training, and I would encourage you to do it with your staff as well. Give them a few minutes and ask them to come up with a list of what makes a successful adult. Because I've done this, I've probably done this in 15 or 16 different groups in the last year. And I'll ask them to come up with a list of 10 things that make up a successful adult, 10 characteristics of a successful adult. And I think in the last year that I've done this, maybe once have I heard anybody say reading, writing, and math. And that kind of goes back to the premise of this conversation. We can be rules first, where we focus on just academics and structure and rules, or it can be a relationship-focused campus. And what I found is being relationship-focused prepares our students to be successful in life. Because when we come up with this list, very rarely do we see reading, writing, math as the content areas. What we do see is a lot of those soft skills: perseverance, integrity, honesty, work ethic. Those are the things that are important to us. So we need to spend time building relationships with kids. We need to spend time teaching an explicit social emotional curriculum so kids have those skills that will make them be successful in the end. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So this same thing, does your school walk it like we talked about at the beginning? Most schools have a mission statement that talks about making our students successful adults when they walk out. If we're not spending time teaching relationships, if we're not spending time teaching character ed, if we're not spending time teaching the importance of social emotional learning, we're not preparing our kids to be successful adults. We need to do what our mission statements say, which is prepare kids to be successful adults. Next slide. So I want you to think about this. Being Relationship First Campus is what's best for all kids. We're doing kids a disservice if we're not all in for kids and working with them to help them become successful adults. So I think we're about done. And just for the sake of time, you can kind of go through these next couple of slides just to see where we are. I encourage you to come up with an action plan. So kind of based off what you heard today, again, we don't have to throw everything out that we were doing. There's some very successful things that buildings are doing, but kind of come up with a plan. What's maybe one thing, one takeaway you have from today that we can be intentional about the remainder of this school year and in the next school year that we can see some results with? I don't think it's a good thing to say, oh, we're going to do these 5 or 6 things. Let's just slow it down. Let's pick one thing that we heard today that we can be intentional about, that we need to bring to our kids to help them be successful. Next slide. Just kind of, some of the stuff that I got, but I want to hear from you guys, what questions you have. I know Patrick's going to help me get some of these questions from you, but if there's any questions, I'm here. Here's my contact information. If you don't follow me on Twitter already, please follow me. I'll follow you back. Anytime you have a question, feel free to reach out to me so I can get back in touch with you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Moffett, for that powerful presentation, sir. We do have some questions. We will try to get to as many as we possibly can in these last few minutes. So let's go ahead and kind of dive into some Q&A here for the last 5 minutes or so, if you don't mind.
Okay.
So one question that we received, students that have extreme trauma at home. It seems like the person asking these questions are having difficulty de-escalating them, and they seem to explode often. How do you handle kids that have this level of trauma and they're having a hard time fixing them and reaching them in their school?
I think one of the biggest things is like we have to be willing. A different training I do, we talk about ABC charts. How we always have been trained. What's the what happened before? What's the behavior? What's the consequence? And one of the trainings I got right away was the consequence has to happen as close to behavior as possible, or it's meaningless. And in my time really shifting to be trauma informed, I've learned that that's not true. Some of our students, they become triggered, and the last thing we want to do at that point is lecture and have conversation. Sometimes it's about being willing to take a pause, take a break, teach them those regulatory skills that they know how to do deep breathing on their own, go to a peace corner on their own. And when that student is ready to have a conversation, then we can have the conversation. So that's important, but also the importance of a consistent relationship. And as you begin to have a consistent relationship with a student, you have to know that that's not going to happen overnight, especially for our students who've experienced lots and lots of trauma. They're going to be so reluctant and so skeptical of anybody who comes in their life because they've been let down so often before. And so as you begin to establish that relationship, it might be a quick, every single day. I know for one student I had, every single day, hey, I love you. I love you. It wasn't a conversation. I wasn't forcing a conversation down his throat. It was I love you. I love you. And it literally took me a year and a half for him to reciprocate that feeling and for us to have a really good relationship. And so I think it's important that even though we want to see these things corrected or fixed, for lack of a better word, quickly, it's not always going to happen quickly. So we have to be willing to put in the work and put in the time and the intentionality over time to see the relationship begin to foster and build.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. We should be the reprieve for the students when they come to school, right? So, having understanding trauma a little bit too, like you mentioned earlier, if we're calm, hopefully they're calm. And the more that we can understand how trauma are affecting our folks, the better opportunities we have to educate them. Because we know in our experiences here at Grafton, and I'm sure yours as well, is if a student's not feeling safe in that environment, they're not going to learn, no matter how hard we try and what we force on them. So, kind of connecting to everything that you've mentioned before in your presentation is making sure this environment is welcoming for them and that the people that they're working with, they have strong relationships with. So I agree with you 100% there. How do you respect different personalities in a building with strong relationships and strong personalities?
I think one thing we did, and when you have these conversations, you kind of forget things you used to do that you need to go back to. But there's a thing out there. It's called, we all know like the 5 love languages, but there's another survey out there that's called the 5, it's like languages of appreciation. And so we took that survey a couple of years ago. And I think one of the things we have to be careful about is often as adults and as kids, we assume that people like or respond to the same things that we like and respond to. But that's not always the case. And so even in the way you show appreciation for others, so we took this survey and it talks about, some people like, physical touch, some people like gifts, and there's different ways that people like to be shown appreciation. That was a quick survey that we did. And then for those that were comfortable, they shared their results. So we had a Google Doc that was open to everybody so you can see how people like to be shown appreciation. And I say that because if I know how you like to be shown appreciation, that kind of helps me work to build my relationship with you as well. Because you're right, everybody's different. Everybody has a different background. Everybody receives things differently. So it's definitely important that you're respectful of cultural differences, gender differences, as you're looking to build relationships with people in your building, because you don't want to turn somebody off, because even with your best intentions, you might turn somebody off if you don't approach them in the right manner. So that's a survey that I literally Google searched, and it was just like, how do you, it's like the languages of appreciation inventory.
Absolutely. And, it's also being trauma informed and being sensitive to our peers too. So everything like with what you're saying, for us to piggyback onto that too, is understanding that our colleagues experience trauma and our colleagues are having tough days, and the more that we can support each other, hopefully it does trickle down to our students. And I think you even mentioned something about that earlier too. Culture amongst I think you said culture amongst staff reaches the student, and they're aware of it too. So, if we're treating each other with those positive, strong relationships, and we're being trauma sensitive to each other, children are bound to pick up on that, right?
Well, for sure. This is not just a kid thing. This is the all-in. Everybody needs this changes the culture of a building, because it changes the way you interact with your colleagues and your students.
Absolutely. Well, Principal Moffett, I thank you. I do want to be sensitive to everyone's time and their schedule. So we'd like to thank you for presenting today, and thank you for joining us in this discussion. Yes, sir, absolutely. And of course, we hope this is not the end of our dialogue with each other, and that we can hopefully stay in touch. And we look forward to hearing more great things about what you're doing, and hopefully folks that have shown interest and joined us today obviously have that interest, and hopefully they can be on that ride with you and with us as well here with Ukeru, because I think what you're trying to accomplish obviously is exactly what we're trying to spread across the world, and we really appreciate your time and your mission and what you have going for you guys at Derby Hill.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I'm sorry, go ahead, sir.
I was just saying I look forward to connecting with folks so they have questions, and just continue the discussion even after this.
Absolutely. All right, thank you so much.